Hey guys, hello everyone. This is International Master Asaf Givon here. Welcome back. In this video lesson, we are going to talk about another aspect of positional sacrifices. This is going to be dealing more with opening type of sacrifices. So I'm going to talk about positional sacrifices which intend to punish the opponent for slow development or for some mistakes in the opening stage. So basically using this type of sacrifices to utilize or to use a development advantage. So in some cases we would be playing a game where we would have a very good position out of the opening, where we already developed most of our pieces, finished our development. The opponent maybe is still struggling. So what is a very important thing to do in such scenario is not to just continue to play kind of normal chess, normal moves, because then your opponent might catch up on development and eventually he might be okay. We need to be slightly more aggressive, slightly more attentive to what he's doing in order to stop that. So in the first example, we're going to see a game of Boris Spassky with the white pieces. I've chosen to show you this game from the very beginning. So we had d4, d5, c4, queen's gambit, d takes c4. This is the so-called queen's gambit declined. Black is accepting white's gambit. And after a couple of pretty standard opening theory moves, a6, queen e2, knight c6. Actually, already here, white's pawn on d4 is under attack. But Spassky makes an interesting decision to even just ignore kind of this threat and just continue developing, because in case that white chooses to play c takes d4, actually white can take on d4, and once again if black chooses to accept the gambit, white gets a lot of initiative, because black lost a lot of time capturing that pawn. Now white will have some very nice tempos against the queen. One idea is to play rook d1 with a tempo against the black queen. The black queen needs to move even one more time, and white is basically playing for quick development, not counting pawns so much. So Spassky's opponent played a sensible move, pawn to b5. The idea is to attack the white bishop and get ready to develop the black's bishop later on b7. So black took on d4, white played rook to d1, pinning this pawn against the black queen. And now I want you to notice that in the next couple of moves, rather than trying perhaps to develop some kingside pieces and get his king castled, black is busy moving some pieces on the queen side, and he never really finishes developing his king side as getting his king castled. He plays bishop to b7, in a way a sensible move, trying to get control over the long diagonal. White took back his pawn on d4, and as you can see, white is already threatening to break through in the center with the move d5, since the pawn on e6 is pinned. So black played knight b4, so he thought that by doing this he will prevent white from playing d5, and then if white plays some normal moves, later on black will play bishop e7, he will castle his king, and perhaps post a very strong knight on d5 later on, and we'll have a nice game. But what he didn't maybe take into account too much, or didn't think about it enough, was the fact that he's really neglecting his kingside development. Already he moved his knight 2 times. He's a little bit far away from castling. So Spassky probably realized at this point that this might be a good chance for him to go for the offensive. So when we have a development advantage, what we need to think about is how to open up lines against the enemy king. Especially we need to take into account this E file, which is usually the file where the black or our opponent's king is being posted. So in this position, there are a couple of interesting moves actually. I think what Spassky did is the most principled, the most logical move. We will come to this later. Also makes sense is to play moves such as a4, trying to force black to take an action about his pawn on b5. But perhaps in that case, black would just sacrifice himself this pawn on b5 just to finish his development. But a4 is being a possible move is not as principled and as aggressive as the move d5. Now, in a way, this move is kind of, in my opinion, begging to be played. White already has the rook supporting it from behind. He already has a lot of pieces concentrated in the center. The only question is what to do if black just takes on d5, because we can see that the knight on d5 is defended quite a lot of times. So for a lot of people, in order for them to sacrifice material or give up a pawn or a piece, they would only do that if they would see a very clear way to either regain the material or get a very concrete attack. But the beauty of this game is by its very simple concept that Spassky gave up the pawn, and in my opinion he didn't see a very clear way of let's say regaining his material, but he saw that in a couple of moves from now black will be unable to castle until the rest of the game. He will get very strong outposts for his pieces, and most importantly he will be able to open up the E file. So he played bishop g5, very logical move, developing his last minor piece into the game, creating the spin on the knight, and trying to undermine black's kind of blockade on the d5 square. So black was forced to play bishop to e7. And now, if in this position the black king would have been already castled, black would be completely fine here, I think. But since the king is still on e8, Spassky takes advantage of that by taking immediately on f6, using the fact that now obviously the knight cannot capture on f6 because he will lose his queen, and if the bishop takes, then black is just losing a piece because of knight takes d5. So black was forced to play g takes f6, after which white took on d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5. So white basically forced black to recapture with kind of in undesirable way. You see now that the black pawn structure is completely ruined, and he just played knight to d4, and I believe that this was Spassky's last position that he calculated in his head when he originally played this breakthrough with d5 on move number 12. He didn't see a clear way to victory, but he's seen that his knight is about to land on c6, maybe f5. So this in itself prevents black from castling, because if, for example, black castles, white will play knight c6 with a simple fork, wins material. So black would be forced to play king f8 like happened in the game. And once again, white is not having any concrete way to victory here, but black is unable to castle. White's knight on d4 is extremely dominant on the light squares. White now played knight on f5. Black played pawn to h5, trying to maybe activate his rook, also preventing this square from the queen. But this move already enables white to execute a very strong tactical idea, which you might want to try to stop the video and try to find. It's not too difficult, but very nice. It's rook takes d5, queen takes d5, queen takes e7 check, and after king to g8, queen takes f6. We see that white not only is threatening to checkmate on e7, is also threatening to fork the king and the queen with the move knight e7. This is why black actually resigned at this position. By no means Spassky had seen all of this variation when he originally played d5, but he definitely sensed that the move d5 is justified, that he must play this move in order to open up lines against his enemy's king and force the king to stay in the center of the board. Let us move to the next example. Once again, we are playing the white pieces, and we have no less than Garry Kasparov playing with the white pieces. In this game, and also in general, in Kasparov's games, we can see that in his style, Kasparov had a huge feeling and huge understanding for initiative and attack, and he always was used to be known as a very unforgiving player if the opponent really commits even the smallest inaccuracy in the opening part of the game. In many cases, they would get crushed and not even be able to step out of the opening. So after some normal opening moves, we have the Queen's Indian. White took on d5, knight takes on d5, queen on c2, bishop e7, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3. He played the move c5. His idea is to undermine white's kind of big center, but Kasparov uses here a very nifty little move to slightly distract black's kind of natural development. He played bishop e5 check, using the fact that black cannot really play knight d7 or knight to c6 because of knight e5, with some very big tactical problems with the knight on d7. So bishop c6 is forced, white played bishop to d3, and then by this Kasparov really destabilized his opponent's position a little bit, because the bishop on c6, as we will see later on, will be vulnerable to some white attacks. Black played knight d7, developing castles. And here comes the move which, to some extent, or by some sources, was claimed to be kind of black's critical mistake in this game. He played a little bit of a slow move h6. We can explain this move with the fact that if black would just castle, then white might play the move d5, and after e takes d5, e takes d5, bishop takes d5, his pawn on h7 would be hanging, and he would lose some of his pawn shield formation. But this would be still better than what happened in the game, because after h6, we are going to see now a similar type of move to what Spassky played. He played rook to d1 first of all, with the idea to prepare later on the pawn break on d5. He already puts his rook in opposition to the black queen, kind of forcing black to play queen to c7. And now Kasparov understood that on the next move, black is going to castle, basically safeguard his king, so he understood that he must act right now. And this is something all of you people have to remember. A very critical moment to act is within the move before the opponent castles. That's your chance to get him, because once your opponent is castled, usually his king is much safer, and in order to develop an attack against it, it would take much more effort. So what did Kasparov do here? Probably some of you already guessed it. He played d5, a very strong pawn break in the center. Once again, as we've seen in the previous game, with the idea to open up more lines against the enemy king. E takes d5, e takes d5. Black played the move bishop takes d5. If black is declining white's offer, then his position will be equally bad. For example, after bishop e7, I would actually ask the viewers to suggest some ideas to stop the black king from castling, I think there are actually few. So one idea I can mention is the move rook to e1, making sure that the black king will be forced to defend his own bishop. A similar type of move would be queen e2. Also interesting is to sacrifice the pawn on d6 still, kind of literally forcing the opponent to take this pawn in order to open up even more lines against the king. So black decided that if he is already going to suffer, at least let me suffer for some material. White played bishop to b5, creating a threat against the bishop on d5, but also an x-ray against the knight on d7. If black plays the obvious move bishop c6, white has a nice intermediate move bishop to f4. Nice development, nice chance to develop one more piece with a tempo. And after bishop c6, queen c6, after the very precise move rook to e1, black is now forced pretty much forever to stay in the middle of the board. White has more than enough compensation here for one pawn. So black played a little clever move a6, trying to exchange some pieces, but after the very precise bishop f4, queen takes f4, bishop takes d7, king takes d7, rook takes d5. Now white is basically going for the hunt of the black king. Once again, white is still a pawn down, but it's really is not going to matter at the end of the game if the black king is going to get checkmated. So black played king to c7, and white finished his own development with the move rook to e1. You see that white's attack here by this point is already unstoppable, and after a couple of more precise moves, bishop to d6, rook to f5, a little bit of a double attack. Black was forced to play queen to c4 to defend the pawn on f7. But white now has a classical deflection type of move. He wants to deflect the queen from defending the pawn on f7, so he plays rook to e4. And now the queen can no longer maintain the diagonal against his pawn. And already from here it was very easy. White has not only a very strong attack, but also the material equality. So the next couple of moves, just for the sake of completion, rook to e6, rook to d8, c4, queen c6, and after knight e5, queen c8. I really like the last move of this game, because normally at the last move of a chess game you see either a very pretty checkmate, usually going with your pieces forward, but actually in this game the move which made black which forced him to resign was actually a move which takes a piece backward. It's queen to b1, maybe not the only move which wins, but the most precise one, creating the threat against the black pawn while maintaining defense over white's first rank from any kind of potential back rank issues. So in this video we were discussing a couple of positions where white sacrificed the pawn very early on in the game in order to keep his opponent king in the center. That's a very important concept to remember. If your opponent is delaying his castling, delaying the development of his king side, you should act very quickly to open up lines against the king. Try to force the black king to stay in the center of the board by either checking him or forcing him to defend the piece in front of him. Like we've seen in this game, the black king was forced to defend some pieces in front of him, like the bishop and the knight. This way you kind of make sure that he's going to stay there. And of course, keep in mind that you don't always need to calculate everything until checkmate when you do such sacrifices. It's enough for you to see that maybe you give up some material. It can be a pawn, sometimes even more. But if you can force your opponent to lose his right to castle, in many cases it's really worthwhile, because with the king in the center of the board, the opponent is much less likely to survive the next part of the game. So really hope you enjoyed this video, hope you learned something. See you guys in next videos. Bye bye.